everybody, welcome back to Whiskey Outpost. As always, I'm Chris. I am manning the Outpost solo today, but that's fine because it means more bourbon for me. How's it going? So, I'm actually recording this on March 5th, which is 2 days after actual Bottled and Bond Day, but I'm a big fan of Colonel Taylor, a big fan of the Bottled and Bond Act, so I wanted to at least talk about it. So, let's consider ourselves super early for 2024, and 2024 is Bottled and Bond Day, right? Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. So, we're going to start off by saying that we are drinking a bourbon that it was produced bottled in bond. This is Colonel E.H. Taylor's small batch bottled in bond. You can see that right there. It is 100 proof bourbon. It is produced by Sazerac. It's actually one of the companies that along with Buffalo Trace and with all those folks, they all kind of get made together. And Colonel Taylor is actually known for being a pioneer of a lot of things in the bourbon industry. We'll get to all of that in a second. This is actually what the bottle looks like. As you can see, I have done several pours of this over the ages. Um, and this is a small batch. There are several other types of E.H. Taylor, but this was kind of the entry one. And a lot of people really like it. I think the nose is proof. I think it's a little dirty. It's probably barrel charred, but to me, it comes off dirty. And the taste starts off very strongly butterscotch in the front, and then goes to strawberry and raspberry on the end. Since I don't like butterscotch, this isn't my favorite pour, but I do crack it open when friends come over because they love it. And yeah, more power to them. Let's let people drink what they like, right? I'm not saying it's offensive. For 100 proof, I think it's strong, but it's not too strong. And I think that it's all it's good. It's just not my favorite. And there's a lot of things around here that I'd rather be drinking instead. That's actually blasphemy in some quarters, but that's okay. I will stand on my own 2 feet and say that there are things I prefer. With that said, I have huge respect for the man Colonel Taylor for a couple reasons. Now, if you haven't heard of Colonel E.H. Taylor and what he did for the Bottled and Bond Act, if you don't know what the Bottled and Bond Act is, we're going to cover all of that in a couple minutes of not necessarily drunken history style, but certainly sipping whiskey history style. And I'll just give you a summary, but there's a lot of sources out there on the internet you can check out and lots of other videos that you can watch on this topic. But what the Bottled and Bond Act was a act that set aside uh, warehouses, bonded warehouses, that the government would run, and there'd be a fee paid by the folks that were using these warehouses. But the whiskey, the bourbon, whatever would go into these warehouses had to meet certain standards. But as long as those standards were met, the government would ensure that what was on the label was what was actually ended up in the bottle. And this was hugely important because at the time the Bottled and Bond Act came about, there was a lot of shysterism going on. So, excuse me, too much bourbon. On one side, you've got folks like Colonel E.H. Taylor, you've got Ezra Brooks, you've got John Carlyle, who was the Treasurer of the United States, and they're saying we've got to get a hold of what it means to make bourbon. What is this? What's a good product look like? And on the other side, you have a whole bunch of people that are just kind of doing whatever they want. And you realize that during, right before E.H. Taylor uh, gets the Bottled and Bond Act to pass in 1897, really, you see a movement from people doing whatever they want. They buy barrels, they take it to their bar, they serve drinks out of the barrel. So they could water that barrel down. They could say it's whiskey when it wasn't. I mean, there was really no law to say that when I sell you this pour, you know what you're getting. The Food and Drug Act actually comes out of the Bottled and Bond Act. So a lot of the things that we take advantage of for food safety today doesn't exist. As a matter of fact, if you've heard of Old Forester, the gentleman behind Old Forester is actually the first guy to put his drink into bottles and sign them and seal them so that you actually had some level of confidence that what you were drinking was actually what you thought you were drinking. You also, again, have men like Colonel Taylor, who was not a military colonel, he was a Kentucky colonel. He grew up, his father died, he moved to Louisiana, and he was brought up some pretty fine schools by his uncle Zachary Taylor. If you know history, it's that Zachary Taylor. He moves back to Lexington, Kentucky, lives with his uncle Edmund Haynes Taylor, EH Taylor Sr., who's a banker, and he runs into some money because he's a banker. He goes to Europe, says, "Hey, whiskey's awesome," and he's right. He comes back, starts opening up distilleries here in the United States, one of which is OFC. And if you know OFC, it ends up becoming, all basically it is the granddaddy of like Buffalo Trace and ones you've heard of today. One of the cool things, though, that Taylor does is he's such an artisan and believes so strongly in the craft that he does things like bring in copper pots and steam heating and things that we use today, including, I think, some mash bills. And Taylor's recipes were so cool. I believe the Buffalo Trace unearthed several of his old copper stills, and they're actually trying to produce his drink in those stills, and people like me are going to pay a lot of money for it. So, I mean, good on them, right? So, again, you've got Taylor sort of championing this is what whiskey should be. On the other hand, you have a lot of people that just want to make money, often increasing demand for whiskey and bourbon. So during the Civil War, you had people fighting in Kentucky and they drank Kentucky bourbon. And if you're watching this, you probably know that once you drink Kentucky bourbon, you don't stop drinking Kentucky bourbon and you just buy a bunch of bottles and you start YouTube channels and all that kind of stuff, right? It's good. So there's a rising demand for it, and you get people that are just doing whatever they want because again, there's no regulation. And a lot of people will think that the Bottled and Bond Act that we were talking about actually defines what a bourbon is. It doesn't. It just sets aside some provisions to make sure that what we say goes into this bottle is actually protected by independent government agents. So, just to give you an idea how bad things are, and I had to write this down to read it. In 1853, there's a book published by Pierre Lecour called "The Manufacture of Liquors, Wines, and Cordials Without Distillation." So there's a book going around to satisfy people's taste for whiskey, and what it's advising you to do is take some ethanol, mix in kerosene because that's healthy, tobacco juice, oak bark, prune juice, whatever you want. Get something that's about that color. Doesn't matter how it's tasting because you're going to sell it and you're going to make money. Yeah. So you can understand why there needs to be a law. There's also a guy named Walter B. Duffy who sells Duffy's Pure Malt Whiskey. It's one of my favorite things ever. Uh, if you can get your hand on a bottle of pure malt whiskey, you're in luck because it cures cancer, the flu, indigestion, bronchitis, gout. It will cure your ugliness. It will allow you to outlove your children because I guess your children aren't drinking Duffy's pure malt whiskey. And why would you let them? You want to outlive them, right? And it makes the weak strong. The advertising campaign for Duffy's Pure Malt Whiskey is a Reverend Dr. McLeod who thanks God for Duffy's Pure Malt Whiskey. And this dude is selling barrels of the stuff, making money hand over fist. And then you have an artisan like Taylor who is freaking out because this is not right. So what he does is he works with Ezra Brooks, which hopefully you've heard of Ezra Brooks because he's got his own. Well, he's got a line of bourbon named after him. Uh, John Carlisle, Treasurer of the United States, and himself go to work, and they basically say this isn't right. They rally the other distillers. They create. They finally get this legislation passed, and so the important parts of the Bottled and Bond Act are there's government oversight of this product. You put it into a bonded warehouse, and it's not going to be tampered with. There's tax incentives to do it. And then the bourbon has to meet the following criteria. It has to come from a single distillery, so no mixes. And assume that there's nothing the government really cares about mixed bourbon, except for the fact that one source makes it easier to determine the authenticity. The bourbon has to come from one season. And a season is defined as January through June or July through December. Again, I'm assuming that that is for verification of the product. The bourbon has to be aged at least 4 years. It has to be 100 proof. And they originally put a tax stamp on there, but they got rid of that later. And so essentially, what this does is it passes one of the first laws that, excuse me, I've been drinking too much, that says that when I hand over my money for this drink, I know that I'm drinking Colonel E.H. Taylor's whiskey the way he intended it to. Or I'm drinking Old Forester, I'm drinking Ezra Brooks, I'm drinking anything else. This legislation actually paves the way for the Food and Drug Act because everyone was so happy to know that they're actually getting the genuine article that it expands into other things where you want to know that the meat that you're eating is actually beef and not something else, right? I mean, it's a huge landmark legislation, and I think it's pretty exciting that something really cool came out of our need to drink and make sure that we're happy. So part of the reason that I really like talking about the Bottled and Bond Act, I think it's neat that it caused other effects. But if E.H. Taylor doesn't stand up and say, hey, this isn't right, the whiskey industry probably isn't what it is today because you have an increasing demand. But if what is meeting that demand is terrible, the demand's going to taper off, right? It may be one of those things where, hey, I really enjoyed this a couple of years ago when I was in Kentucky. Now that I'm back home, I can't get the good stuff, or maybe I don't remember it right. It may kill all demand for it. So by standing up and saying, hey, we want to have a quality product and we're willing to put our money where our mouths are, we end up with a product that we can all be happy with. Now today, most whiskeys aren't bottled in bond, which is fine. I don't think that we need that necessarily anymore. I don't know. That's probably a controversial statement. Like, I'm still very glad that we have bottled and bond, and I'm drinking E.H. Taylor because it was the one I could find. But I've got the McKenna 10 year. It's bottled and bond. I've got Heaven Hill. It's bottled and bond, and I'm very happy that bottled and bond exists. Don't get me wrong. And if everything wanted to be bottled and bond, that's great. I mean, it does prevent certain styles of whiskey or bourbon or whatever. I mean, great. That's fine. I'm not really worried about that so much, but I think that the important thing is there are quality standards within the industry. And those quality standards, for the most part, are still being met. I think that all of the distillers out there today are very much invested in meeting the standards of quality that were set out. So even if it's not bottled and bond, and if they're not doing single source or single season, we're still taking advantage of the fact that we expect certain things when we open a bottle, and market forces are demanding consistency, safety, and that sort of thing. But again, all of that had to be a culture shift, and all of that had to be education, and it had to be a lot of work, sweat, and tears based off of Colonel Taylor and the work that he did so long ago. So I'll still buy bottled and bond when I can find it. I still think it's important because I want to make sure that we continue a culture of being very sure that what we put in here is safe to drink and it is what we say it is. I mean, with the price of bourbon going up so dramatically, we want to make sure that we're drinking the good stuff and we're not drinking something that's been tampered with, adulterated, watered down, whatever. So, okay, that's probably a little rambly, but we can certainly cheers to Colonel Taylor, knowing that what we drink is what we think it is. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to drink a lot of kerosene. I really don't. I think it's a bad idea, you know. And it's kind of funny. A lot of what we talk about they were doing prior to the Bottled and Bond Act sounds a lot like what they were doing in Prohibition. And a lot of people died, went blind, got lead poisoning, all that kind of stuff because of it. And again, we don't have to worry about it anymore because we've got food safety laws and that sort of thing. So, all right, that's probably a little rambly. Hopefully, you stuck with me. Feel free to like, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification button. We're moving to weekly schedules, unlike the first month of the year in which we were doing daily. So, if you're worried about getting too many notifications, that's not going to be a problem anymore. But yeah, I want to know what you think. Let me know if you feel like the Bottled and Bond Act is important still, or have we moved past it, or did you know what it was and have any other questions? Let me know. I'd love to talk about it. Again, see you next time. Hit that like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. See ya. Bye.